rise to move Amendment 145 that appears in my name and also speak to Amendment 146 and 147. And I thank the Noble Lord, Lord Howarth of Newport, who's swung behind these amendments since committee. And in terms of Amendment 147, the Noble Lady Baroness Tyler of Enfield, I thank her very much for her support. All of these, my Lords, as we discussed at some length in committee, address the issue of predatory finance in the care sector. And we keep seeing more and more reports, whether it's Panorama, whether it's Tortoise Media, whether it's the Financial Times, that there's a huge unfolding scandal in this area. Now, when we look back to what was said on in committee, I note that the Noble Lady Baroness Altman said, and I quote, there's a problem with companies taking advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in our society without oversight or controls. And the Noble Earl, the Minister, in his response in committee, provided some suggestions of how these oversights the Earl thought were being provided. But the fact is, of course, we have a huge problem, as has been set out in committee, as was set out in other debates in your Lordship's House. We have very many cases of 16% return being taken out of the cost of care, in places up to 20%. Now, I think the Noble Lady Baroness Thornton in committee said that the current system is wholly dysfunctional, and Amendment 146, calling for a review, is the amendment that seeks to particularly deal with that issue. And I'd love to hear that the government was going to see that to be a great idea and step forward today. I'm not expecting it, but one lives in hope. Going back to Amendment 145, this picks up an issue about financial assistance, something quite new and surprising perhaps, that's introduced in this bill and that's had very little discussion, the fact that the government can provide financial assistance to care home providers in a way that's never been before. Now, what my amendment in committee said was this could not be used to pay debt. Now, the Noble Lord the Minister then quite rightly pointed out that there was an issue that if a care home wanted to, say, pay a debt it owed to the local linen service for washing its linens or similar operational costs, then that would be potentially a reasonable form of rescue. What was intended to be addressed was, as the amendment now says, debt incurred outside the business's normal day-to-day operations, interest on debt, because we know that those are the kind of financial instruments often used to extract these extraordinary rates of return, and of course paying dividends to shareholders. And we saw during the COVID pandemic the payouts that went to care home providers that were at the same time paying very significant dividends to shareholders, and there was considerable public shock and anger about that, and this is addressing a similar kind of situation. So if the Noble Lord the Minister is to say to me that the wording that I've come up with in this amendment doesn't quite meet the demands, I will accept that they may well be the case. This is perhaps a first effort at it, but I really would like to ask the Noble Earl the Minister if he really thinks it's right to pay money to rescue, money that goes to dividends or money that goes to debt that's a product of financial engineering. And I'll also pick up the point that the Noble Earl the Minister made in response at committee, saying that there are the usual security and safeguards around spending on public money. I think we could all feel the House drawing a deep breath and being terribly reasonable at that point and not reacting. But I would point out that we seem to have, perhaps not quite daily, but certainly weekly, reports from the National Audit Office expressing grave concerns about the way in which public monies are being spent. That's an after-the-fact report that doesn't really seem to ever have any impact. So what we actually need is to stop this money flooding out, this public money flooding out. So finally, just to pick up another point the Noble Earl the Minister said in committee, he said that maintaining quality and high standards is vital, and that's the government's focus. Well, I would say that it is utterly impossible to be maintaining high standards, top levels of quality, if 20% of the money being paid or 16% of the money being paid is going off into profits. Then it clearly cannot be the best possible quality that it could be. So I think that we are at a point where we've had considerable debate, considerable expressions of support for these amendments for addressing these issues. We may perhaps not at this moment in your Lordship's House be ready to actually push a change into law, but I think there's an issue being very much highlighted here, and I hope that we might see some movement from the government. We're actually seeing movement in a very similar and related area on Wednesday with the economic crime bill, a sudden last-minute rush reacting to public pressure. Wouldn't it be nice to see the issues being raised in these amendments dealt with in a more orderly way, in the manner of an orderly review, to actually fix what's very clearly a problem with the funding of our care sector? I beg to move.